Good day, students! Welcome to this video. This time, we're going to teach you on how to solve for the standard deviation of group data. Based on the research that we had, 31 among 54 respondents of our paper are committing mistakes when solving standard deviation. That's why we come up with an instructional video for us to help them, for you to know on how to solve for the standard deviation of group data. So let's have it. Step number 1. Solve for the midpoint of each class intervals.
The first step in solving for the standard deviation of the group data is to solve for the midpoint. To solve for the midpoint of each class intervals, we need to add the lower limit and upper limit, then divide it by 2. So we have here 31 plus 35 equals 66 divided by 2 equals 33. 36 plus 40 equals 76 divided by 2, so our midpoint is 38. 41 plus 45 equals 86 divided by 2, and our midpoint here is 43, and so on and so forth. So that's how to solve for the midpoint of each class intervals.
For the next step, step number 2, multiply each frequency to its corresponding midpoint.
Next, we're going to multiply each frequency to its corresponding midpoint. So we have here the column for the frequency, and we have already the value of midpoint. So we need to multiply them and get their product. So 4 times 33 equals 132. 7 times 38 equals 266. 12 times 43 equals 516, and so on and so forth. So that's how we are going to multiply the frequency to its corresponding midpoint.
We get the summation of all the product summation of f of x.
The next step is to get the summation of all the products from multiplying the frequency and midpoint. So we have here the products 132, 266, 516, 384, 318, and 174. If you add it together, the answer will be 1,790. Always take note that always double check your numbers so that you avoid errors when it comes to problem solving.
We now proceed with the next step, which is the step number 4, solve for the mean.
For this step 4, we are going to solve for the mean. The formula that we are going to use to solve or to find the mean is mean equals the summation of f of x over n is equal to 1,790 over 40. So where did we get the 1,790? 1,790 is from the summation of f of x, or the frequency multiplied by the midpoint, and 40 is the total number of the frequency. 1,790 divided by 40 is equal to 44.75, or our mean is 44.75.
Now that we already have our mean, let us now move to our step number 5, which is subtract the mean from each midpoint.
For the next step, or the step number 5, we are going to subtract the mean from each midpoint. Given our midpoint on the third column, which are 33, 38, 43, 48, 53, and 58. Let us have first the first midpoint, which is 33. 33 minus 44.75 is equal to negative 11.75. Next is 38 minus 44.75 is equal to negative 6.75. Next is 43 minus 44.75 is equal to negative 1.75. Next is 48 minus 44.75 is equal to 3.25. Next is 53 minus 44.75 is equal to 8.25. And last, 58 minus 44.75 is equal to 13.25.
You are almost there. As you reach the step number 6, get the absolute value of the difference.
Step 6, we are going to get the absolute value of the differences. or simply we are going to get the positive version of that number. Given that we have negative 11.75, the absolute value will be 11.75. Negative 6.75, the absolute value is 6.75. Negative 1.75 is 1.75. 3.25 is 3.25. 8.25 is equal to 8.25. And 13.25 is equal to 13.25.
In solving the step number 7, we're going to multiply each absolute values to its corresponding frequency.
In multiplying each absolute values to its corresponding frequency, first we're going to look for the frequency, which is the F column. Multiply by the absolute value of the difference between the midpoint and the mean. First, we have the frequency of 4 multiply the absolute value of 11.75 equals 47. Next, the frequency of 7 multiply by the absolute value of 6.75 equals 47.25. Next, we have the frequency of 12 multiplied by the absolute value of 1.75 equals 21. Next, we have the frequency of 8 multiplied by the absolute value of 3.25 equals 26. Next, we have the frequency of 6 multiplied by the absolute value of 8.25 equals 49.5. And lastly, we have the frequency of 3 multiplied by the absolute value of 13.25 equals 39.75.
Solving the step number 8, we're going to square the absolute values.
In squaring the absolute values, there are two ways in solving it. First, raising the number by 2. Second, multiplying the number by itself. So now, we're going to look for the absolute values between the difference of the midpoint and the mean. Now, we have 11.75 squared gives 138.06. Next, we have 6.75 squared gives 45.56. Next, we have 1.75 squared gives 3.06. Next, we have 3.25 squared gives 10.56. Next, we have 8.25 squared gives 68.06. And lastly, we have 13.25 squared gives 175.56.
Solving the step number 9, we're going to multiply each result by its corresponding frequency.
In multiplying each result by its corresponding frequency, we're going to multiply the frequency times the squared absolute value between the difference of the midpoint and the mean. So now, we have the frequency of 4 multiplied by the squared absolute value 138.06 equals 552.24. Next, we have the frequency of 7 multiplied by the squared absolute value 45.56 equals 318.92. Next, we have the frequency of 12 multiplied by the squared absolute value 3.06 equals 36.72. Next, we have the frequency of 8 multiplied by the squared absolute value 10.56 equals 84.48. Next, we have the frequency of 6 multiplied by the squared absolute value 68.06 equals 408.36. And last, we have the frequency of 3 multiplied by the squared absolute value 175.56 equals 526.68.
The next step, step number 10. Find the summation of the results.
For the step 10, we are going to find the summation of the results of the frequency quantity squared the absolute value of midpoint minus the mean. Simply, we are going to add, using our calculator, the value in this column. 552.24 plus 318.92 plus 36.72 plus 84.48 plus 408.36 and last plus 526.68. The total is equal to 1,927.4.
For the next step, step number 11, solve for the variance.
Now for the step 11, we are going to solve for the variance. Using the formula, variance is equal to the summation of frequency quantity squared the absolute value of the midpoint minus the mean all over n minus 1 is equal to 1,927.4 over 40 minus 1 is equal to 1,927.4 over 39. And our variance or the final answer is 49.42.
For the last step, step number 12, solve for the standard deviation.
And here we are for the last step, which is the step 12. We are going to solve for the standard deviation. The formula that we are going to use to solve for the ST or the standard deviation is S is equal to the square root of S squared or our variance is equal to the square root of 49.42 equals 7.0.
After doing the 12 steps, we have now arrived at the answer 7.03 as the standard deviation of the given group data. Hope that it helps you a lot, and that's how we solve for the standard deviation. We are hoping that this video will help you minimize your errors or mistakes when it comes to problem solving, especially when solving for the standard.